My name is Eliza Kavanaugh. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life, I was the designated achiever, top of my class, dependable big sister, the adult in the room even before I was technically one. I built my identity on making everyone proud until the day I realized my family was ashamed of me. It started with a wedding, my brother Luke's. I was the last to find out he was getting married, and even then, I didn't hear it from him. I found out on Instagram, casually scrolling on a Tuesday night, wearing my oldest pair of sweatpants and eating leftover takeout when I paused on a post tagged, "Had Kavanaugh ever after?" There he was, Luke, my baby brother, grinning in a navy suit. His fiancée, Molly, was in white, a courthouse shot. Caption, "Surprise! Just us, just love." I blinked, sat up, refreshed. Nothing from Luke, nothing in my texts, nothing in my inbox, not even in the family group chat, where I was usually the first to post birthday reminders and "don't forget daylight savings" messages. I clicked Molly's profile. Story highlights, a soft focus video of them exchanging vows under a floral arch, a quiet dinner, her mother holding her hand, my mother giving a toast. I stared at the image, my eyes darting from face to face. My dad, my cousins, even my Aunt Cecily, who lived in Vermont and hadn't flown in for anything since 2012. Everyone was there, everyone except me. For a second, I convinced myself I must have missed something, that I'd seen the post late, that my invitation had been lost, that surely someone would have mentioned it. Then I saw the comments. "Best night ever. Your sister was glowing. Tell Eliza the pics are amazing." Wait, where's Eliza? That one stopped me. My stomach clenched. Molly replied, "She couldn't make it." I hadn't even known it was happening. I didn't text anyone. I didn't call. I just closed the app, dropped my phone on the couch, and sat there for what felt like hours, the silence of my apartment growing louder with each breath. It wasn't anger at first. It was something quieter, meaner. It was shame. I had given everything to this family, covered Luke's first month of rent when he got laid off, helped my parents refinance their mortgage, flew home on red-eyes to make Thanksgiving happen when Mom had surgery and couldn't cook. I'd been the one to remind Luke to get his tux dry cleaned when he stood up in 2 of his friends' weddings. I even sent Molly a hand-picked Christmas gift last year, pressed flower earrings from a boutique in Maine. But when it came time to celebrate their biggest day, I was absent. Not accidentally, deliberately, and someone had lied to make that absence look like my choice. I sat up straighter, my chest tightening. I was never supposed to be the one they left out. I was the golden child, wasn't I? The dependable one, the overachiever, the one who didn't drink too much at family reunions or make a scene or forget people's birthdays. But now, I wasn't even worth a mention. The next morning, I woke up to an email from my mom. Subject line, "Hope you're doing okay." Body, "Just wanted to say hi. I know you've been so busy with work and everything, but hope we can catch up soon. Love you always." No mention of the wedding, not even a hint, as if I hadn't just discovered I'd been ghosted by my own family. I didn't reply, not because I didn't have words, but because I had too many, and none of them were nice. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the manuscript I'd been working on for over a year, a memoir, loosely structured, half love letter, half exorcism of growing up in a family where perfection was praised, but presence was conditional. I hadn't told anyone I was writing it. I hadn't planned to finish it. But that morning, I sat at my kitchen table and typed for 5 straight hours, my hands shaking the whole time, because suddenly I wasn't writing in theory anymore. I was writing in proof. I titled Chapter 1, "The Night They All Toasted Without Me." And that was the beginning. I didn't tell anyone I was writing again. Not my friends, not my therapist, not even Naomi, my editor friend who'd begged me for months to turn my family philosophies into something real. I just wrote. Every morning before work, every night before bed. I wrote like I was digging something out of myself I didn't know was buried so deep. A memory, a version of me no one had ever met because I'd spent my whole life performing a character instead. At first, the words came out in a rush, hot and bitter. I called things by their names. The time my mom accidentally left me off the group vacation email thread. The way Luke would snicker behind my back with Dad about how Eliza always needs everything in order. The Christmas when they opened presents without me because my flight was delayed and no one thought to wait. But then the heat started cooling. I wrote past the rage, into the ache. The younger version of me who used to get straight A's and be met with a distracted, "That's nice, honey." Who won the state debate tournament in high school while Mom was on the phone with the caterer for Luke's Little League banquet. Who built an identity out of usefulness, not love. And somewhere around page 70, I realized something. I wasn't writing to get revenge. I was writing because I needed a witness. I needed someone, anyone, to see what I'd carried, what I'd performed, what I'd swallowed. And if it couldn't be my family, maybe it could be the page. 2 weeks after the wedding post, Molly tagged me in something. It was subtle, her and Luke at a restaurant laughing over sushi. I was tagged in the background. I wasn't even there. It was a photo taken months ago, when we'd all been out celebrating Luke's job offer at the hedge fund. The last time I'd seen them, actually. I remembered the dress I wore that night. Blue silk, conservative cut. Molly had complimented it. She captioned the photo. "Family means showing up, #flashback Friday." It was a trap. A digital red herring. Something that made it look like we were all good. That I had in fact been there. That there was no rift, no exclusion. I didn't comment. I didn't repost. But I saved the screenshot. And I added it to the book. By chapter 4, I was finally naming the thing I'd always been too afraid to say out loud. I wasn't just the achiever in my family. I was the scapegoat in a blazer. They needed me to be impressive so they could resent me for it. Needed me to succeed so they could call me arrogant. Needed me to never need them back. I realized it most clearly in the flashbacks I hadn't expected to write. Memories that came uninvited, like broken dishes surfacing in the soil of an old yard. My 8th birthday party, when Luke smashed my cake out of jealousy and my parents laughed and told me to be the bigger person. Senior year when I got into Columbia, and Dad said, "Don't let that East Coast attitude change you." Every time I succeeded, they diminished it. Every time I was hurt, they ignored it. Every time I pulled away, they called me distant. I hadn't seen it before because I didn't want to. I thought being needed was the same thing as being loved. But now, with every sentence I typed, I saw the truth take shape like a photograph developing in a darkroom. They didn't want me there. They wanted what I represented. They didn't leave me out of the wedding by mistake. They left me out because I no longer fit the picture. By the end of that month, I had over 90,000 words. I called the manuscript the guest room because that's what I'd always felt like. In the house, in the family. On the invitation list, sure, but never in the inner room. I didn't plan to publish it. Not then. I wasn't ready. But I emailed Naomi the draft anyway, just to have it read by someone who didn't share my blood. 3 hours later, she called me in tears. "Eliza," she said, "this isn't a book. It's a mirror, and people are going to break when they see themselves in it." I swallowed. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "It's the truth," she said, "and it's going to change someone's life." Mine, it turned out, because that's when she sent it to her agent. And everything started moving faster than I could process. The manuscript got picked up in 2 weeks, sold in 6. The publisher called it timely, raw, a debut with bite. I didn't tell my family. I figured they'd find out eventually. But I wasn't ready, not for the fallout, not for the silence, not for the performance of confusion that would inevitably follow. So I kept my head down, did the edits, signed the contract. And when The Guest Room hit #1 on the non-fiction list 3 months later, after a viral TikTok review, a podcast interview, and a reading that left 3 women sobbing in the front row, I still hadn't heard from Luke. Not a word. Until the DM came. From Molly. "Congrats on the book," she wrote. "Hope it gave you whatever closure you needed." No heart emoji, no exclamation mark. Just enough sugar to call it civil. Just enough venom to remind me that the wound was still open. I stared at the message for a long time. And then I replied. "It wasn't closure I needed," I wrote. "It was clarity. Thanks for helping me find it." And I hit send. I didn't tell anyone I responded to Molly. Not Naomi, not my therapist, not even Rachel, my oldest friend, the one who'd known my family since we were kids and had quietly winced every time I told her a new story that ended with, "But I get it, they're just busy." I didn't want feedback. I didn't want caution or applause. I wanted the satisfaction of a clean reply, the kind that echoes back only truth. I wasn't angry anymore, at least not in the searing, throat-clenching way I'd been when I first saw the wedding post. That anger had cooled into something quieter and more dangerous. Clarity. Because the thing about being excluded once, truly excluded, in the kind of deliberate silence that doesn't even bother to lie to your face, is that it makes you revisit every other moment you didn't realize was a snub. Every, "You're fine, right?" that really meant you'll figure it out without us. Every inside joke you never quite understood. Every photo where you were just a little to the side of the group. I couldn't stop thinking about Thanksgiving 3 years ago. My apartment was the only one big enough to host, and I'd cooked for 12, stuffing from scratch heritage turkey, a pie I'd practiced 3 times. I'd even printed place cards. My mother showed up with cranberry sauce from a can and a vaguely offended look at my linen table runner. Luke arrived an hour late and made a big show of opening a bottle of wine like he was the sommelier of the family, even though I'd already set the bar cart. No one said thank you. When I brought out dessert, Molly looked at her phone and said, "Oh shoot, our Uber's here." They were gone before I could even serve the whipped cream. That night, I stood at my sink washing dishes and telling myself I was lucky they came at all. That next year would be better. That families were complicated, and maybe if I just tried harder, but they hadn't tried. Not once. They just showed up, took, left, and somehow I was the one who felt like she had to apologize. Not anymore. Now I had a book, a wildly successful, borderline viral, deeply personal book that didn't name names, but didn't have to. Anyone who knew us, anyone who'd ever been at those dinners, seen the way Molly's smile curled when I spoke too long, watched my father go silent whenever I mentioned a new project or raise, would know exactly who I was talking about. And I hadn't exaggerated. I hadn't even added the worst stories. I'd been kind. Naomi told me that's what made it so powerful, that I didn't need to paint them as villains. The truth was more damning than any fiction. The press requests poured in faster than I could manage them. A morning show producer emailed Naomi with, "Does Eliza want to talk about the high cost of being the perfect daughter in modern families? We'd love to do a sit-down." I said no to that one. I wasn't ready for the couch. But I agreed to a podcast with a therapist influencer I admired, Dr. Mariel Green. She'd read the book in one sitting and called it a portrait of learned self-erasure so vivid, I kept checking to see if someone had sent her my journal. We recorded in her Brooklyn studio on a rainy Thursday. "You're remarkably calm," she said during our session, her voice warm and velvet smooth, for someone who just lit a match on her family's mythos. I smiled tightly. I didn't light anything. I just stopped holding the fire for them. She leaned in. "What do you think your family sees when they look at you now?" I paused. Probably someone disloyal. "Do you agree with that?" "No," I said, "but I think I used to." The episode dropped that weekend. Within 12 hours, I had over 1,000 new followers and 400 DMs. Most were women. Many were crying. Some had already bought second copies of The Guest Room for their sisters, their mothers, their estranged daughters, and then came the message I'd been bracing for, Luke. It arrived late, 1:14 a.m. on a Sunday night, Just a name and 3 sentences. Saw the interview. Guess you got what you wanted. Hope it was worth it. No punctuation. No context. I sat there in bed, the phone glowing against my comforter. I read the message over and over, waiting to feel… what? Vindicated? Furious? I wasn't sure. But what I felt instead was a strange, aching loss. Because he still didn't get it. He still thought this was revenge. A petty lashing out from the sibling who was too intense or too sensitive. Not a reckoning. Not a boundary. Just drama. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood what it meant to not perform anymore. I didn't owe him a defense. My silence wasn't a punishment. It was peace. But the message did something else. It cracked something open. Because no matter how composed I looked on podcasts, no matter how tidy my sentences were in print, the truth was, I missed having a brother. Not the one who made backhanded jokes about my type A energy. Not the one who chose convenience over closeness. But the one who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. The one who let me braid his hair when he was 6. The one who called me first when he didn't get into UCLA and just wanted someone to say it didn't mean he was a failure. That boy, that brother, I mourned him. Mourned the idea that I could ever get him back. The book had made me a best-selling author. But it also made certain doors close permanently. And that's the thing no one talks about when you start telling the truth. Not just about others. About yourself. The grief is real. Even when the silence is earned. Even when the clarity is a gift. Because you don't just lose the performance, you lose the audience too. The truth is, even after the book hit, even after the podcast, I still found myself waking up some mornings wondering if I'd overreacted. That's the tricky thing about being conditioned to keep the peace. You start confusing silence with safety. You start wondering if telling the truth made you ungrateful, dramatic, selfish. I'd look around my quiet apartment and feel the faintest whisper of doubt. Was it really that bad? And then I'd check my email and see another message like this. Hi, Eliza. I cried reading your book. I've always been the capable one in my family. Thank you for naming what I couldn't. Or this. My mother told me last year I was too intense for asking to be appreciated. You reminded me I'm not alone. And it would settle something in my chest. The reminder that naming pain doesn't create it. It just brings it into the light. I wasn't imagining the ways I'd been sidelined. I had simply been too busy performing usefulness to let myself feel it. One afternoon, about a month after Luke's late-night message, my mom called. The name flashing on my screen froze me. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 3 months. Not since the wedding I hadn't been invited to. She hadn't said a word about the book. Not a text. Not a mention. Not even a passive-aggressive, well, I skimmed some of it. But now she was calling. No voicemail, just a single ring, and then nothing. I didn't call back. Instead, I opened my inbox and found an email waiting from her. The subject line was simply, Sunday dinner? Inside, she wrote, Eliza, I know things have been hard between us. I read your book. I didn't know how much you'd kept inside. I'd like to talk. Maybe this Sunday? No pressure. Just us. Love, Mom. It was the first time I'd seen her write no pressure. I stared at the screen like it might change if I refreshed it. But it didn't. She was inviting me to dinner, not to fix anything, not to explain, not to fold me back into some fragile family script, just to talk. I didn't respond right away. I forwarded the email to Naomi instead. She replied instantly, Your move. Sunday came with that familiar buzz in my chest, the one I always got before family gatherings, the one that told me to be shiny, composed, polite. I ignored it. I wore jeans, a soft cotton tee, no makeup. I brought nothing, not a dessert, not a bottle of wine, not even the smile I'd worn like armor at every family dinner before this. When Mom opened the door, she looked tired, not worn down, but real. No lipstick, no earrings, her hair pulled into a messy bun I'd never seen outside of Sunday mornings. Eliza, she said, almost like a question. I stepped inside. The table was set simply. 3 plates, a roast chicken in the center, a bowl of carrots, nothing elaborate, no effort to impress. "Dad's at your Aunt Karen's today," she said quickly. "I wanted this to be just us." I nodded. We sat in silence for a moment, long enough for the clink of her fork against the plate to feel like punctuation. "I read the whole thing," she said finally, "cover to cover, twice." I looked down at my plate. "I wish I could say I didn't recognize the version of me in it," she said. "But I did." I looked up. "I recognized her, and I didn't like her," she continued, "but I also didn't feel surprised." My breath caught in my throat. "I think I always knew," she said softly, "that you were caring more than you should have. I let you, because it was easier." There it was, the line that cracked something open. "I was tired," she added. "That's not an excuse, it's just the truth. I let you become the adult because I couldn't always be one." I nodded slowly. "That's how it felt. And then," she said, voice trembling, "you grew up, and we just never gave you permission to stop." The air between us went still. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the adult at the table. I didn't feel like I had to take care of her. She was owning it. "I didn't mean to leave you out of Luke's wedding," she said next. "That's not an apology. It's an admission. I should have said something. I should have insisted he invite you. But he said it would be easier if it was small. Just people who were part of the vibe." I scoffed. "The vibe?" She winced. "I'm not defending it. I'm just saying I didn't fight for you. And I should have." My chest ached. "I thought if I didn't bring it up, I could keep the peace," she said. "But I see now I was keeping it for everyone but you." We sat in that silence. "I'm sorry, Eliza," she whispered. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But instead, I felt this strange warmth spreading through me. Not absolution, not even full forgiveness, but a loosening. "Thank you," I said. "Can I ask something?" she said. I nodded. "What do you want from me now? Not what you needed then, what you need now." It was the kind of question I'd spent years waiting for, even if I didn't know it. I looked at her across the table, her hands trembling slightly around her glass, and said, "I want to be allowed to be human." She exhaled. "Okay." "I want to stop earning my seat at the table," I added. "I want it to be mine, whether or not I'm useful." "It always was," she said. "No," I replied. "But it can be now." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We didn't solve everything that night. We didn't need to, because repair doesn't always start with fixing. Sometimes it just starts with the truth sitting quietly on the table, finally unafraid of being spoken. After that dinner, I expected the silence to return. That was our family's default setting. Brief honesty, followed by months of avoidance. But this time, it didn't. The next morning, my mother texted, "Thank you for coming. I meant every word." And a day later, she sent another. "Your dad wants to talk. No pressure. Just when you're ready." I wasn't ready. Not yet. But the seed had been planted, that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to do all the emotional heavy lifting alone anymore. Meanwhile, the world outside my family was changing fast. The guest room was no longer just a surprise bestseller. It had taken on a life of its own. Readers were organizing book clubs around it. Women were tagging me in videos of themselves crying on their bathroom floors, dog-eared pages in their laps. Influencers quoted lines I barely remembered writing. "Stop mistaking being useful for being loved. You're allowed to leave the room, even if no one notices you're gone." At first it overwhelmed me. The idea that my story, one so small and specific, had unlocked something so vast and unspoken in so many people. But then I realized it wasn't about my family, Not really. It was about what we all learn to believe when we are praised more for our silence than our presence. I received one message from a woman named Clara that haunted me for days. I haven't spoken to my sister in 7 years. I didn't even know I missed her until I read your book. That's when it hit me. This story wasn't just a mirror for readers. It was a portal, a way through. I printed the email and taped it above my desk. One evening, about 2 weeks after my dinner with Mom, I got a call from Naomi. "You need to brace yourself," she said, her voice careful. I stood by my window, one hand on the sill, heart already racing. "What happened?" "Your brother, Luke. He went on the morning table today." I froze. "What?" "He did an interview about you, about the book. I think it was supposed to be damage control." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. "You want me to send the link?" she asked. "No," I said. She waited a beat. "Eliza, you should see it." "I will," I promised. "Just not yet." After I hung up, I sat on the floor of my living room, back against the couch, staring at nothing. He had gone on national television to talk about me, the brother who hadn't invited me to his wedding, the brother who texted a passive-aggressive, "hope it was worth it." And now, this? It took me 3 hours to open the video. When I finally pressed play, the screen lit up with Luke's face, groomed, camera ready, in that stiff way he always was when he didn't want anyone to know he was nervous. He wore a blazer, no tie, casual professional. His voice when he spoke was flat. "The book was a surprise," he said. We weren't consulted. We weren't warned. And for a while I felt betrayed." The host nodded, all sympathetic eyes and practiced silence. "I mean, it's not like Eliza asked us to be part of it. We were just characters in a story she'd already written." My stomach twisted. "But then I read it," he continued, "and I realized she wasn't making things up. She was just finally telling the truth we didn't want to look at." The host raised an eyebrow. "Do you feel guilty?" Luke hesitated. Then, "I feel like I took her for granted. I feel like we all did." I blinked. "I think I liked having a sister who fixed things," he said. "And I never once asked what it cost her to always be the one who showed up." The host leaned in. "Do you want to reconnect?" Luke looked down, smiled faintly. "I do, but on her terms. I think she's earned that." When the screen went dark, I just sat there, silent, stunned. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't even addressed to me directly. But it was public. It was vulnerable. And it was more than I ever expected from the brother who used to laugh when I color-coded the family calendar. I didn't text him that night. I didn't text him the next morning either. But a few days later, I sent a message. "Saw the interview. Surprised me. Thanks for saying what you did." He replied a minute later, "Thanks for writing what you did." And for the first time in nearly a year, our conversation didn't end in silence. A week after that, we met for lunch. Just us. No Molly, no parents, no tension, at least not at first. He showed up with an awkward half smile and 2 coffees, even though I hadn't asked. I sat across from him in the corner booth of a cafe we used to go to in high school. I could barely look at him for the first 10 minutes. "I don't know where to start," he said, hands wrapped tightly around his cup. "Start where it hurt," I said. "That's what I did." He looked away, then back. "It hurt that you didn't tell me you were writing." "It hurt that you didn't invite me to your wedding," I said. He nodded. "Fair?" We were quiet for a long time. Then he said something I didn't expect. "Do you remember that camping trip when we were kids, when I fell and split my chin open?" I nodded. "You bled all over my sweatshirt." He laughed. "Yeah, but I remember something else. I was crying, and Mom was yelling, and Dad was trying to find the car keys, and you just sat next to me, held my hand. You didn't freak out. You just said, "You're gonna be okay. I've got you." I swallowed. I was 12. "I know," he said, "and I'm 30 now, and I never once said thank you." He looked at me then, really looked. "Thank you, Eliza." And I let it land. Not because it erased everything, but because it was real. Because sometimes healing starts with a memory you both survived, and finally see the same way. The week after lunch with Luke, I found myself rereading the last chapter of The Guest Room. It felt like reading someone else's journal. Not because I didn't still believe the words, but because they'd come from a woman braced for abandonment. A woman who wrote like truth was her last defense. I didn't regret publishing it. Not for a second. But now I understood something I hadn't when I first wrote it. Telling the truth doesn't end the story. Sometimes it's just the middle. I closed the book and slid it back onto the shelf, next to my collection of other memoirs. Most were by women. Most were about breaking, quietly, beautifully, and stitching themselves back together with thread made of hard-earned clarity. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Rachel. "Okay," she said without preamble. "Are you emotionally stable enough for a sister's weekend? Or are you still in post-publication protective hibernation?" I laughed. "What kind of weekend?" "The kind with wine, yoga, and a hot tub. Possibly crying, possibly karaoke. We leave Friday." I hesitated. "You deserve soft things," she added, gentler now. "Not just victories. Softness." So I went. We drove up to the Catskills, the air getting crisper with each mile. Rachel had booked us a little cabin with big windows and too many throw blankets, the kind of place where everything smelled faintly of cedar and clean sheets. On our second night, after too many glasses of wine and a brutally honest round of "what's one thing you're still holding?" Rachel curled her feet beneath her and looked at me. "You know," she said, "you've always been so good at surviving. But surviving isn't the same as living." I tilted my glass toward her. "Thanks for the gentle drag." She smiled. "I'm serious. You're finally letting people see you. But when are you going to let someone carry you?" That stuck with me, because the truth was, even now, after the book, the interviews, the apologies, I still hadn't asked anyone for help. Not really. Not even Naomi, who had practically willed this book into existence through the force of her belief. Not even Rachel, who once slept on my floor for 3 days when I got dumped in grad school and couldn't stop crying long enough to make toast. I thought about the part of The Guest Room where I'd written, "I'm tired of being a one-woman life raft for people who poke holes in me when they climb aboard." It got shared everywhere, but I hadn't written the follow-up. What happens when people stop poking holes? What happens when they start offering to row? I didn't have an answer yet, but I wanted one. When we got back from the trip, there was a letter in my mailbox. Not an email, not a text, a real letter, handwritten. The return address was my dad's. I stood there in the hallway of my apartment building, keys in one hand, bag still slung over my shoulder, and stared at it like it might explode. It didn't. It was 4 pages, written in blue ink, his familiar neat print. No preamble, just this. "Eliza, I read the book. I read it twice. Your mother said it was hard. It was, but not for the reasons she thinks. It was hard because I saw myself in every chapter and realized how often I confused your competence with invincibility. I want to say I'm sorry, but that feels small. You don't need an apology. You need recognition. So here it is. I saw what you carried. I just didn't want to admit you were carrying it alone. You deserved more from me, not because you were perfect, but because you were present, always, even when the rest of us weren't. If you ever want to talk, I'd like to listen. No interruptions, no excuses. I'm proud of you, even when it stings to read the truth. Love. Dad." I read it once standing in my hallway, then again on my couch, shoes still on, and a third time later that night when I couldn't sleep. Each read felt like a weight loosening, like a bruise that had finally stopped being tender. I didn't call him immediately. I needed time. But I folded the letter carefully and slid it into the back of my journal. A few days later, I started writing again. Not a book, not a blog post, just for me. About growing up in a house where silence was a currency, and I became rich in quiet suffering. About learning how to speak without flinching. About what it means to be the person everyone expects to be fine, and finally deciding that fine isn't enough. And for the first time in years, I didn't write like I was trying to prove something. I wrote like I had nothing to hide. A few weeks later, I invited my parents over for dinner. It was the first time they'd come to my apartment since before the book. I didn't cook anything fancy, just pasta and garlic bread. No candles, no music, just plates, napkins, and a bottle of wine I didn't open until after they arrived. Mom brought dessert, a pie, store-bought but thoughtful. Dad brought a small bag with loose photographs, old ones. Me and Luke on the beach, my 8th birthday, the camping trip. He placed them on the table. Thought you might want to remember who we were, before all this. I do, I said. But I also want us to know who we are now. We sat. We ate. We talked. No one cried. No one performed. At one point, my dad said, "You know, I've started reading your book out loud to your aunt." Mom blinked. "You have?" He nodded. "She says it makes her think about her own daughter. They haven't spoken in 5 years." I swallowed. "I think you might have done more good than you know," he said. And for once, it didn't sound like a compliment layered with obligation. It just sounded like truth. That night, after they left, I sat in the quiet and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just peace, not just relief, but permission. To stop being the one who always fixes, to let others meet me halfway, to know that telling the truth didn't destroy my family. It made us honest. And maybe, finally, it made us whole. A month passed, then another. The world didn't collapse. No one staged a family intervention. My book stayed on the bestseller list for a while, then drifted lower as other titles took its place. The headlines moved on, but something in me didn't. I had changed, not drastically, not the kind of cinematic transformation where I cut my hair and buy a plane ticket to another country. I still drank the same brand of coffee, still did yoga on Wednesday mornings, still had a job, bills, emails with subject lines like, "just circling back." But underneath that, something had shifted, quietly, irrevocably. I wasn't performing anymore. Not at home, not at work, not in the mirror. One Thursday afternoon, my manager, Kevin, asked me to stay late and pick up an internal project that wasn't in my scope. Before, I would have said yes instantly. I would have smiled, said, "Of course," then spent the night resentfully eating dinner at my desk while everyone else logged off. This time, I paused, looked him in the eye, and said, "No." Just that. No explanation, no apology. Kevin blinked. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said. "It's just not my responsibility." He nodded slowly, like I'd spoken in a language he hadn't heard from me before, because I had. That weekend, I went on a walk with Rachel through Prospect Park. We'd been doing these walks since college, our ritual of recalibration. It was sunny, the kind of day where the air feels like it's made of honey. We passed picnics and golden retrievers, and one guy playing acoustic guitar so badly, we both winced in unison. "You seem different," Rachel said, as we rounded a bend. "Good different?" "Real different," she said. "Like, you're not holding your breath anymore." I thought about that, about how much of my life had been spent bracing, anticipating who I needed to be in every room, which tone to use, what role to fill. Now, I just showed up. "Honestly," I said, "I think I'm finally figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be impressive." Rachel smiled. And I'm a little weird, a little obsessive, a little tender. but I like her." We walked in silence for a while after that. Later that night, I got a text from Luke. "Hey, Molly's baby shower is next month. She wants you there." "I do too." I stared at it for a while. I hadn't seen Molly since the wedding. That wasn't. She hadn't reached out. Hadn't said a word about the book, the fallout, the aftermath. Part of me still burned when I thought about that old story highlight. Me tagged in a photo I wasn't in, an invitation I never received. But this was something. A step, a question, a gesture. I replied, "Okay, if it's real, I'll come." Luke responded, "It's real, I swear. No games." And somehow I believed him. The day of the shower was bright and loud. I showed up a little late on purpose. I didn't want to be the one setting up chairs or fixing the playlist. I wanted to walk in like a guest, not a manager. When I stepped into the backyard, I froze. A banner read, "Welcome Baby Kavanaugh." Balloons twisted around the porch railings. A table overflowed with gifts. And standing near the mimosa bar, laughing, barefoot, radiant, was Molly. She turned. Our eyes met, and something in her face shifted. She walked toward me slowly, like she wasn't sure how to begin. "Eliza," she said. "Molly." "I wasn't very kind," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "You weren't." A pause. "But I've been thinking about what you wrote. Not just about us. About me." I stayed quiet. She swallowed. "I thought you looked down on me, that you were judging me all the time. And maybe I decided to beat you to the rejection." That stunned me more than any apology could have. "Were you?" she asked. "Judging me?" "No," I said honestly. "I was scared of you, scared of how easily you made me feel small, like I didn't belong." She blinked, like she hadn't expected that. "I was never trying to be the villain," she said. "I know," I said. "But intent doesn't erase impact." She nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, Eliza." I nodded back. "Thank you." It wasn't a hug. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. It was just honest. And that was enough. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of pastel cupcakes and lawn games, and women I didn't know very well, making small talk about stroller brands. I didn't stay too long. I gave my gift, sipped one drink, and left while the sun was still high. But I didn't feel like I was sneaking out early. I felt complete. Later that night, Luke texted me. "Thanks for coming. She told me what you said. I'm glad you both said it." I replied, "Me too." And that was all. No over-explaining. No apology for leaving early. Just two adults, finally learning how to speak plainly. I went to bed that night without checking my calendar, without editing a text 10 times, without wondering if I had done enough to earn my seat at someone's table, because I hadn't shown up to prove anything. I'd shown up because I wanted to. That was the new standard. Not guilt, not obligation, desire, and the quiet power of finally choosing myself first. A few weeks after the baby shower, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and watched the late summer light bend itself around the edges of the buildings. It was golden in that nostalgic way that makes you feel like you're watching your life through a filter. Soft, cinematic, a little too pretty to trust. Below, people walked dogs, laughed loudly, argued about groceries. Life doing what it always did, moving forward. And I was learning, finally, how to move with it. I'd started writing again. Not a book this time, not even for publication, just essays, little meditations, observations, snapshots. I wrote about peeling oranges at midnight, about the way my neighbor's kid laughed like he was telling a joke to God, about silence that didn't ache, only stretched. One afternoon, I read one of them aloud at a small local reading series. It was in the back of a bookstore with creaky floors and a mismatched collection of folding chairs. Nothing fancy. Maybe 20 people. But when I looked up from my last line, maybe being known starts with letting yourself speak without translating, the room was still. A woman in the back wiped her eyes. I hadn't read anything personal aloud since the book tour, and I hadn't realized how much I missed that connection, that sacred space where words are a bridge, not a defense. Afterward, someone came up to me and said, "That felt like being given permission to breathe." I smiled. Me too. On my way home, I stopped at a corner cafe and texted my mom, "Hey, thinking of hosting dinner soon. Just something simple. You, Dad, maybe Luke and Molly. Let me know if there's a weekend that works." Her response came quickly. "We'd love that. Just tell us what to bring." The fact that she asked what to bring felt like a quiet miracle. We chose a Sunday. I roasted chicken, made a salad, bought dessert from the French bakery on 9th Street because I didn't want to stress about baking. I cleaned, but not obsessively. I didn't light candles. I didn't overthink the playlist. This wasn't a performance. This was a table. And I was choosing to sit at it, not because I had to, but because I could. They arrived right on time. Luke brought a bottle of wine. Molly brought fresh bread from a place she said she'd been meaning to try. Mom and Dad came with a basket of fresh flowers and a bag of groceries, just in case. It was the most casual thing we'd done together in years. But it felt like a landmark. We sat around my table and talked about things that had nothing to do with the book or the fallout or the past. We talked about Dad's attempt at container gardening, about Molly's bizarre pregnancy cravings, apple slices and mustard, about the weird guy who plays saxophone outside the library every Saturday and insists on taking requests. It was easy. And for once I wasn't scanning the room for emotional undercurrents. No one expected me to refill their glass without asking. No one looked to me when the bread ran out. Luke stood up and grabbed it himself. Molly asked how work was and didn't cut me off halfway through my answer. There was no invisible scorecard, no measuring of who gave what and who didn't say thank you. Just people. Just dinner. After dessert, Mom stood to help clear plates. I started to rise too, out of habit, and she waved me down. "No, really," she said. "Sit. You hosted. Let me take care of it." And I did. I stayed in my seat, watched her move around my kitchen like it was sacred territory, familiar and strange. She hummed softly, the way she used to when we cooked together when I was little, before life made her so tired. Molly stood beside her, rinsing dishes. They worked like a rhythm, small, unassuming, easy. Luke brought out more water. Dad leaned back in his chair, cradling his coffee like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. And I looked around and thought, this is what I was trying to build all along. Not perfection, not performance, connection. We didn't talk about the book that night, not directly, but as she was leaving, Mom lingered at the door, keys in hand. "You know," she said quietly, "I reread Chapter 7 last week." I looked at her, surprised. "Really?" She nodded. "I used to think you made everything harder than it had to be, that you were just intense." I smiled faintly. I am. She laughed, then shook her head. "No, Eliza, you were hurting. I just didn't know how to see that." Silence stretched between us. "I see it now," she added. "And I'm sorry it took so long." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm glad you're still here," she said. "Me too." And she left. Simple as that. No grand declarations, no tears, just acknowledgement. Just enough. Later that night, I sat down at my desk, opened a new document, and wrote, "I thought telling the truth would ruin everything. I thought love was a contract I had to earn. I thought being the strong one was the only way to be needed. I was wrong." I hit save and closed the laptop. I poured myself one last glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony again, the night warm against my skin. Below, the city breathed, and this time, I breathed with it. The morning after the dinner, I woke up with a calmness I didn't recognize, not the temporary peace of a clean kitchen or a successful evening, but something sturdier, something earned. I lay there in bed, sheets tangled around my legs, sunlight slipping through the slats in the blinds, and felt my own breath. Steady, unforced. For the first time in years, I hadn't replayed the night before in obsessive mental detail. I hadn't asked myself what I could have said better or worried if someone felt slighted by the brand of salad dressing I chose. No guilt, no second-guessing, just stillness. And it terrified me, because that kind of peace, the real kind, it doesn't show up until you've let something die. A role, a delusion, a version of yourself that was only ever designed to please, and I had. I was no longer the default caregiver, the invisible scaffolding. I was Eliza, not the perfect daughter, not the fixer, not the one holding the seams of everyone else's lives together with silent, exhausted hands. Just a woman in her 30s, learning how to be human in front of the people who once only loved her for being superhuman. That realization settled into my skin like warm rain, soft, disarming, real. That weekend, I sat down with Rachel at our usual cafe, corner booth, too much oat milk, a shared croissant we both pretended we didn't want, and devoured in 5 minutes flat. She listened as I told her about the dinner, about the pie, about the flowers, about the moment Mom told me she saw my hurt, and finally didn't try to explain it away. Rachel didn't interrupt. She just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I didn't do anything." "You stopped doing everything," she corrected. "That's harder." I laughed. She was right. We sat in silence for a while, the comfortable kind that only exists between people who've seen each other in the ugly spaces. Then she asked, "Have you talked to your dad again?" I nodded. "He sent another letter." "What did it say?" I pulled it out of my bag. Yes, I carried it with me. Not because I needed to reread it constantly, but because it reminded me that repair doesn't have to be loud. It can be quiet, written, earnest. She read the first line aloud. "I don't know how to father a daughter who no longer needs to be rescued." Rachel looked up. "Wow." "Yeah." We didn't talk for a minute. "He's trying," I said. "I don't think he knows how to show up without fixing something either." "Maybe that's where I learned it." Rachel nodded. We all inherit our dysfunctions. The healing comes when we stop protecting them. The truth of that hit me right in the chest, because for years I hadn't just been carrying my family's needs. I'd been protecting their blindness, justifying their silence, making their comfort more important than my reality. I had taught them how to treat me, and I was finally, painstakingly, unteaching them. That week, I started working on something new, a personal essay, not for publication, just for me, titled simply, "The Intervention I Had with Myself." In it, I wrote about the day I stopped answering every call immediately, the first time I let my mom leave a voicemail instead of leaping to her emotional rescue. The Sunday I ignored the family group chat when they argued about Thanksgiving and didn't ask me to organize it for once. Each act felt small, but it added up. It added up to a life I was living on purpose. And maybe the most radical part? I wasn't lonely. Because somewhere in the distance, the real relationships, the ones built on mutual care, not silent contracts, had started blooming. They weren't fast. They weren't flashy. But they were mine. Luke started calling every so often, not because something broke, just to tell me about the nursery he was painting, or the time Molly cried at a Target commercial. He'd never been good at long conversations, but he tried. And I no longer needed him to be perfect, just present. Mom texted me pictures of recipes she wanted to try. Sometimes she sent them with, "Thought of you, no pressure, just sharing." That last part? That was new. She was learning to offer instead of expect. Even Dad had called. Once, out of nowhere. Just to say he'd seen a hawk on his morning walk and thought I'd like it. No deeper meaning. Just a bird in the sky and a man trying to learn how to say, "I'm thinking of you." in the only way he knew. And Abby, yes, Abby, my cousin who once asked me at age 14 if I ever got tired of trying so hard, sent me a message. It read, "I read your book. I didn't want to. I thought it would be you, just blaming everyone. But it was the first time I saw myself clearly. I've been the one who hides behind drama, who calls people too much, because I'm afraid of being not enough. You said the quiet part out loud. Thank you. I'm sorry for how I treated you." I sat with that message for hours before replying, and when I did, it wasn't with a lecture or a list of old wounds. Just this. Thank you. That means more than you know, because that was enough. That had become my new definition of love. Not people who never let you down, but people who learn how to acknowledge it when they do. That Sunday, I went for a walk. No phone, no podcast. Just the rhythm of my feet on pavement and the sound of early fall leaves crunching beneath them. At one point, I passed a family. A little girl, no older than 5, was clinging to her mother's leg. "But I want to carry it," she yelled, trying to hoist a bag nearly her size. Her mother smiled and crouched beside her. "You don't have to carry everything just because you can." And something in me cracked wide open. Because maybe that's the message I'd needed all along. Maybe that's the line I'll give my daughter someday if I ever have one. Or maybe I'll just whisper it to the version of myself that still lives in old memories. Trying too hard, staying too long, holding too much. You don't have to carry everything just because you can. You are not the job you do for other people. You are not the sum of your usefulness. You are not disposable when you are no longer convenient. You are worthy. Always. Especially when you set things down. So I did. And I kept walking. The holidays crept in quietly that year. No dramatic countdowns, no frantic calls from my mother about head counts or pie crusts. Just a simple text in early December. "We'd love to have you for Christmas. No expectations, no tasks. Just come if you want to." It made me pause. Not just because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. There was no request to bring the cranberry sauce, no assignment to coordinate the food or make a spreadsheet of everyone's arrival times, no guilt-laced follow-up, just a door left open, and I stood on the other side of it for a while, unsure whether to walk through. The truth was, I hadn't spent a real holiday with my family in 2 years, not since before the guest room, before everything cracked open, before the roles collapsed. Back then, I was the engine of every gathering. I made the place cards. I printed the family trivia game. I followed up on whether Aunt Renee was still vegan or just being difficult again. If there were 10 things that needed to happen, I did 9. The 10th was left undone and later gently criticized. But now, I was tired, not exhausted, not angry, just tired in that deep bone way that comes from years of overextension. So I waited. Then, on December 17th, I replied, "I'll come. Thank you for the invitation." The response was instant. "So happy. No pressure. Wear pajamas if you want." I laughed. Progress. On Christmas Eve, I showed up with nothing in my hands, not even a pie, just myself, wrapped in a scarf, and the kind of freedom I hadn't worn in years. The house was already full. Laughter floated from the kitchen. Someone was playing Frank Sinatra through a Bluetooth speaker. The air smelled like cinnamon and something baking, and for the first time, that scent didn't make me brace for expectations. Luke opened the door. "Hey, you made it," he said, like he wasn't sure I would. I stepped inside. "I did." He smiled, stepped back. "Mom said we couldn't start without you." I raised an eyebrow. "Tradition or guilt trip?" He laughed. "New rule. And yes, I still think about that chapter." We didn't say more. We didn't have to. Molly was in the living room, feet up on the coffee table, very pregnant and very unapologetic about it. "Eliza," she called, her voice a little softer than usual. "Come and see the name list." She held up a notepad. I sat beside her on the couch, and for a moment the world tilted slightly. The last time I'd been in this exact spot, she'd barely looked at me. Now she offered me a pen. "We can't agree on a middle name," she said. "Want to weigh in?" I did. Not to be useful, not to prove I belonged, just because she asked. Mom came in later with a tray of cookies and said, "I forgot the fancy napkins." "I think we'll survive," I said. And for once, she didn't bristle. She laughed. "I think we will." We ate dinner. There were mismatched plates and store-bought gravy and laughter over an overcooked ham. At one point, Dad dropped a spoon into the mashed potatoes and just left it there. I waited for someone to correct it. No one did. No one looked to me to fix it. It stayed, awkwardly half-buried, and we moved on. After dinner, someone suggested a walk to see the neighborhood lights. Molly stayed behind, feet up, and Mom offered to do dishes. I froze for a moment, muscles twitching with old muscle memory. She caught my look. "Eliza," she said gently, "go. I've got this." Luke handed me my coat, and we stepped out into the night. The cold bit my cheeks, but I didn't mind. Lights sparkled along fences and rooftops, the kind of soft suburban glow I used to roll my eyes at, but now felt oddly grateful for. About halfway through the walk, Luke spoke. "I was thinking the other day about that time you came to my school to bring me lunch." "Which time?" I asked. "I don't even remember the grade," he said. "I just remember that everyone else had cafeteria trays, and you walked in with a full sandwich, a Capri Sun, and a little Post-it that said, 'You're still my favorite pain in the ass.'" I laughed. "That does sound like me." "I kept the note," he said, "for a long time." We kept walking. "I used to think you were doing all that stuff because you wanted control," he added. "And now?" "I think you were just scared no one else would do it if you didn't." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because that was it, the root of everything. We walked in silence after that, the kind that finally felt earned, comfortable, mutual. Later, back at the house, Mom handed me a small box. "It's not big," she said, "just something that reminded me of you." I opened it. Inside was a keychain. Simple, brass, stamped with the words, "You don't have to hold everything." I looked up. She smiled, eyes shining. "I'm learning too." I reached out and hugged her. A real hug. Not a stiff, obligatory lean, but a long, quiet exhale between two women who had finally seen each other clearly. When I got home that night, I placed the keychain on my nightstand, and before I went to bed, I opened my journal and wrote, "This year, I stopped trying to be everything, and the world didn't fall apart. It got softer, and so did I. I closed the journal, turned off the light, and slept, peacefully. No alarms in my heart, no to-do lists, just rest. Finally. The spring after everything, after the book, after the dinner, after the walk with my brother and the brass keychain that now lived permanently on my bag, I got invited to speak at a local women's conference. It wasn't flashy. No cameras, no agents hovering near the door, just a room full of folding chairs, a few dozen people, and a soft hum of anticipation in the air. The theme of the event was Rebuilding from Within, and the coordinator told me, "We loved your book. We were hoping you'd talk about what comes after." After the breakdown, after the silence, after the story that made everyone look twice, I said yes. Not because I felt fully healed or wholly qualified, but because I'd spent a lifetime believing my value was in what I produced for others. And now, when I finally had something real to say, I didn't want to keep it in. The room was full of women like me, high-functioning, high-achieving, quietly unraveling. They smiled politely as I took the mic. Some of them had my book in their lap, some had notebooks. One woman had her teenage daughter with her, both of them gripping hands like they were afraid they'd lose each other in the crowd. I cleared my throat. "My name is Eliza Kavanaugh," I said. "I'm 34, and I used to think love was something I had to earn." The room stilled. I believed that if I just did more, showed up more, gave more, performed better, then the people in my life would finally make space for me. And when they didn't, When I was left out, overlooked, erased, I told myself it was my fault, that I wasn't easy enough, that I asked for too much, that being seen was selfish. A few heads nodded. What I've learned since then is this: when you spend your whole life being useful, people will forget to ask if you're okay, and if you're not careful, you'll forget to ask yourself too. I took a breath, let it settle. But that's not the end of the story. I told them about the letter from my dad, the apology that didn't arrive with excuses, the Christmas where I didn't fix the gravy or organize the seating chart, and no one complained, the way my brother remembered the Post-it note more than the sandwich. I told them about the day I left my phone in another room and nothing exploded, about how I'd started writing again, not for validation, but because it made me feel real, about how I finally let people help. When I finished, the room was quiet in the way that means everyone is breathing a little slower than before. Afterward, a woman with gray hair and eyes like mine waited until the very end of the line to approach me. "My daughter sent me your book," she said softly. "We didn't speak for almost 2 years. She told me reading it felt like listening to herself for the first time." I nodded, throat thick. "She's here," the woman added. "In the 3rd row. She didn't want to come up, but I wanted to say thank you for giving us a language." I looked past her, found the girl, late 20s, dark curls, red eyes. She didn't wave, just nodded. I nodded back. Language. That's what all of this was in the end. A way to name what we were too polite, too afraid, or too proud to say. When the event ended, I walked home through a neighborhood I didn't recognize. I liked that. No ghosts, just houses with lives I'd never lived, windows that didn't know my name. I passed a bookstore with a chalkboard outside. It read, "You're allowed to put down what you were never meant to carry." I smiled. Later that week, I hosted a dinner, not for my family, not for work, just for a few close friends, Rachel, Naomi, and 2 new people I'd met at a writer's workshop, the kind of friends who didn't require performance, who didn't need me to be anything but present. I made pasta and served wine and didn't apologize when the garlic bread burned a little. We played music. We passed stories around the table like salt. At one point, Rachel raised her glass and said, "To the unsubscribed." The whole table laughed. I laughed. And I felt it. Fully, without hesitation, because this time I wasn't laughing to smooth the tension or make someone else feel comfortable. I was just happy. And that happiness wasn't loud. It wasn't an Instagrammable moment or a peak emotional breakthrough. It was quiet and whole and mine. After everyone left, I stood in the doorway, holding an empty wine glass, and watched the street. The city breathed below me. I breathed with it. I walked back inside, grabbed my journal, and wrote, "This is what healing looks like. A dinner where no one asks you to organize. A family that still shows up even after you've changed. A story that no longer ends in silence. A life that finally belongs to you." And then, because I promised myself I would, because the guest room was never meant to be the last thing I said, I posted one final message to my readers. Have you ever been excluded by the people who were supposed to love you most? What did you do with that pain? Did you turn it into quiet rage, into overachievement, into silence? Or did you find a way to speak? If this story made you feel seen, if you've ever been the one carrying everything while being told you're too much for asking to be noticed, leave a comment. Tell me what you let go of. Tell me what you picked up in its place. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You deserve to be wanted, not just needed. Welcome to the table. You don't have to earn your seat.